Most people spend their weekends fighting plants that have been in documented medical use for thousands of years. Several of them are more nutrient-dense than what's sitting in the produce aisle. One carries more omega-3 fat than nearly any leafy green ever measured, not a supplement. A weed most people spray without a second thought. Another has compounds that have been tested directly against a virus 2/3 of adults are already quietly carrying. One was packed directly into open wounds on battlefields for thousands of years. Roman legions carried it. Civil War field medics carried it before hospitals existed. Wait until number 8. It accidentally gave the world Velcro, starting with a burr on a dog's coat. 14 of them. Every one free. Growing within steps of your own door right now. One of them you've almost certainly seen today without recognizing what you were actually looking at. You probably blew its seeds as a child. Most people have been walking past it ever since. Nothing in this video replaces your doctor. If you're on any medication, have that conversation first. I spent over 20 years as a registered nurse. I've seen both sides of this. This is what I learned to put beside medicine. Let's start with the one most people walk past every day and completely misunderstand. All right, first one, and it's probably the most recognizable weed on this entire list, dandelion. Every single part of this plant is usable, root to flower, and I mean that literally. The leaves and root both carry a strong bitter compound, and bitter flavors specifically signal your digestive system to get moving, more stomach acid, more bile released from the liver, the whole chain reacting the moment that bitterness hits your tongue. It's basically your body's own on-switch for digestion, and dandelion flips it reliably. Preliminary research has looked specifically at dandelion's effect on bile flow and liver function markers, with some encouraging early results. Though I want to be honest with you, the human trials are still fairly small, and the evidence is best described as promising, rather than settled. What is settled is the raw nutrition. A cup of dandelion greens carries more vitamin K than nearly anything else you'll find growing wild, along with a serious dose of vitamin A and a fair bit of calcium, and it costs you exactly nothing to grow. If you're on blood-thinning medication, that vitamin K content is worth mentioning to your doctor, the same as you would with any leafy green you're eating in real quantity. Not a small garnish. Roasted dandelion root as a coffee substitute isn't some modern health trend either. It saw genuine widespread use during wartime rationing in both Europe and the United States, when real coffee was hard to come by, and it's been quietly popular with herbalists ever since. War or no war. Even the name tells a story. Dandelion comes from the French Dandelion, lion's tooth, describing those sharp, jagged leaf edges. The same plant goes by regional folk names in nearly every language it grows in, which is usually a sign a plant's been part of daily life for a very long time. It's also one of the very first food sources for bees coming out of a long dormant stretch. So I'll admit I leave a patch of dandelions right at the edge of the yard entirely on purpose, medicine aside. I'll saute the young leaves like any other bitter green, roast the root and grind it for a coffee substitute, and batter the flowers for a quick fritter. Root to petal. Nothing goes to waste. Generous. That's dandelion, through and through. The plant everybody fights to get rid of turns out to be one of the most complete little pantries God ever left growing in a crack in the sidewalk. Next up is one that's put me in my place more than once, stinging nettle. I'll be honest, I still forget my gloves some mornings, and I still regret it every single time. Those little hairs on the leaf are basically tiny hypodermic needles, and when they break against your skin, they inject a compound similar to what your own body releases during an allergic reaction. That's the sting. It fades in an hour or so. Cooking or drying the leaf disarms it completely. Here's why people kept growing it anyway. Generation after generation, dried nettle has been measured with more iron and calcium, gram for gram, than a lot of the leafy greens sitting in the produce aisle right now, along with a genuinely high protein content for a plant. Traditionally, nettle tea and nettle infusions have been used across Europe for joint discomfort and general rundown feelings, going back long enough that nobody can point to exactly when it started. Modern research on its anti-inflammatory compounds is still catching up to that old reputation, but it's a respectable one. Long before anyone thought of nettle as food, it was rope and cloth. Bronze Age burial textiles have been identified as nettle fiber, and during both world wars, when cotton supplies ran short, Some countries turn back to nettle to clothe their soldiers. Scotland still has a traditional nettle soup that shows up in old cookbooks going back generations, and honestly, once it's cooked down with a bit of butter and onion, it tastes remarkably close to a good spinach soup. Simple. If you're on blood pressure medication or diuretics, mention nettle tea to your doctor or pharmacist before making it a daily habit. It has a mild diuretic action of its own, and it's simple prudence to check for overlap. I dry mine in bundles hanging from the porch rafters, then crumble it into tea, or blend a spoonful of the dried powder into soup near the end of cooking. Handle the fresh stuff with real gloves, dearie, not the thin garden kind. There's actually an old practice called urtication, deliberately stinging an aching joint with fresh nettle on purpose, going back to Roman times. Modern research on it is thin, but the tradition itself has survived over 2,000 years, which says something about how convinced people were that the discomfort was worth it. Humbling. That's the word I'd use for nettle. A plant that stings you on the way in and feeds you on the way out. There's a lesson in that if you're looking for one. Third one, and I'd bet money this is growing somewhere within 20 feet of your front door. Garden or no garden. Broadleaf plantain, not the banana relative, the actual weed. Indigenous peoples across North America gave it a name that's stuck for centuries. White man's foot. Wherever European settlers walked and built roads, this plant seemed to spring up right behind them. In the disturbed, trampled soil people leave wherever they go. Here's what's actually happening inside that leaf. It contains a compound called allantoin, which signals skin cells to multiply and knit themselves back together faster, plus a second compound, aucubin, that helps keep the area clean while that happens. Think of allantoin as a foreman telling the crew to pick up the pace, and aucubin as the security guard keeping trouble off the site while the work gets done. Published research on plantain-based preparations for wound healing has returned encouraging results in several studies, with wound closure and tissue repair being the primary areas of interest. That's not folklore. That's a documented line of investigation in peer-reviewed literature. That doesn't mean I'd reach for a garden leaf over an actual burn unit for anything beyond a minor kitchen burn. See your doctor for anything serious. But for a scraped knee or a bee sting, this is one weed earning its reputation the honest way. I chew a leaf if I'm out in the garden and nick myself, just enough to release the juice, then press it right onto the cut. At home, I'll crush a few leaves with a splash of water into a rough poultice instead. Either way works. There's a narrower-leaved cousin of this plant, ribwort plantain, that's traditionally been used specifically for coughs and respiratory irritation. Often paired in old formulas, right alongside mullein, the plant we'll get to in a few minutes. Different leaf shape, same family, similar reputation. Beyond wound care, native communities across the continent used plantain for insect stings, digestive upset, and even as a poultice for swelling, treating it less like a single-purpose remedy and more like a genuine all-purpose first aid plant, the kind you'd keep close at hand. It's honestly one of the easier plants on this list to identify with total confidence, which matters, because correct identification always comes before use with any plant on this list. Sacred, actually, is a word the Old English herbalists used for this plant. It was on their short list of 9 sacred herbs, centuries before anyone knew what allantoin was. Simple, free. Growing in a crack in your sidewalk right now. Fourth plant, self-heal. Low to the ground, little purple hooded flowers. And if you've got clover in your lawn, I'd bet this is hiding in there too. Easy to miss. Old herbalists in Europe called it heal-all, and in traditional Chinese medicine it goes by a name that translates roughly to summer withers grass, used for generations for the throat and for what they described as heat and swelling in the body. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting to me. Self-heal contains a compound called rosmarinic acid. Along with specific long chains of natural sugar the plant builds for its own defense, and researchers isolated one of those chains specifically and tested it directly against a virus. Published peer-reviewed research found that an isolated compound from this plant blocked herpes simplex virus from binding to cells in laboratory conditions. Separate research has looked at similar antiviral activity against influenza. This is laboratory stage evidence, not a home cure, but it's a real, published line of research, not folklore dressed up as science. The same plant has also been studied for calming an immune system that's gotten a little too loud for its own good, like turning down a smoke alarm that's still shrieking after the toast is already fine. I make a simple infusion with the fresh or dried flowering tops, steeped like a strong tea, and gargle with it when my throat feels the first scratch of something coming on. In traditional Chinese medicine specifically, self-heal is categorized as bitter, sharp-tasting, and cooling, and it's said to act on what practitioners there call the liver and gallbladder channels, traditionally used for swollen glands and eye irritation, alongside its Western use for wounds and sore throats. Rosmarinic acid isn't unique to self-heal either. You'll find it in rosemary and in mint as well, all three sitting in the same broad plant family, which might explain why they share such a long, overlapping history as kitchen herbs that doubled as medicine cabinet staples. Old English herbalist John Gerard wrote about this plant back in the 1500s, ranking it among the very best wound herbs he knew of. High praise from a man who cataloged hundreds of plants in his lifetime. I want to say it was a herbalist I met at a conference years back who first told me its old nickname, All Heal, or maybe it was in a book. Either way, the name stuck with me. Fitting for something that just shows up, uninvited, in half the lawns in America. Stubborn. Fifth on the list, and this one's got the best origin story of any plant we'll cover today, yarrow. Feathery, fern-like leaves, flat clusters of small white flowers. Its scientific name, Achillea millefolium, comes directly from Achilles, the Greek warrior from Homer's Iliad. According to the old story, the centaur Chiron taught Achilles which plants could stop a soldier from bleeding out on the battlefield, and yarrow was the one he carried. That's mythology, but the real archaeological record is intriguing in its own way. Researchers studying Shanidar Cave in Iraq found pollen from yarrow and other flowering plants alongside Neanderthal remains. Whether it was placed there intentionally has been debated among archaeologists ever since, but something brought it there, tens of thousands of years before written history. The plant earned names like soldier's woundwort and staunchweed for a practical reason. It contains a compound called acetylene that helps constrict small blood vessels near the surface of a wound, a fancy way of saying it helps a minor cut clot faster, similar to what your body already does on its own, just given a nudge. It was official enough that the United States Pharmacopoeia listed yarrow as a treatment for bleeding and fever for much of the 19th century, before it fell out of mainstream medical use in favor of newer treatments. One thing worth knowing plainly: because of that same clotting effect, yarrow isn't a great match for anyone already on blood-thinning medication, and that's a conversation worth having with your doctor before you use it regularly, not after. When yarrow's essential oil is distilled, it comes out a deep, almost startling blue from a compound called chamazoline that only forms during the distillation process itself. That same compound has documented anti-inflammatory activity in modern lab research, a nice bit of chemistry hiding inside an old battlefield plant. Contemporary studies have also looked at yarrow's broader antioxidant activity, and the picture that's emerging largely supports what herbalists already believe for thousands of years, which is a satisfying thing to watch happen in real time. It's in the same plant family as chamomile and daisies, if you're trying to spot it by eye. For a minor cut in the garden, I'll crush a fresh leaf between my fingers to release the juice and press it right onto the spot, same as I would with plantain. Ancient. That's genuinely the right word for this one. A plant old enough to have stood beside a people who aren't even us anymore, and it's still growing at the edge of my garden path, provided for, same as always. Sixth plant, and I'll admit this one makes me laugh a little every time I introduce it. Common mullein. Tall, fuzzy, torch-like stalk, with leaves as soft as a lamb's ear. Out on the old cattle trails, this plant earned itself the nickname cowboy toilet paper, for reasons I probably don't need to spell out any further. Those big velvety leaves really are that soft. Long before that nickname, though, mullein had a serious reputation. The ancient Greeks used it for lung complaints. Native communities used the leaves as a soft liner inside moccasins and turned to the plant for fevers and breathing trouble. Stockmen even dosed cattle with it for the same reason, which is where one of its old names, Bullock's lungwort, comes from. Mullein works largely as what herbalists call a demulcent and an expectorant. In plain terms, that just means it coats and soothes an irritated throat the way honey does, while also helping loosen thick, stuck mucus so a stubborn cough can actually do its job and clear itself out. Old herbal texts from the 17 and 1800s, sitting in university archive collections today, list mullein leaf tea for coughs and bronchitis again and again, across completely different authors and countries, which says something about consistency of observed use, even without modern trials to back it. It's worth knowing the flowers and leaves get used a little differently, traditionally speaking. The leaves go toward tea for the lungs, while the yellow flowers have traditionally been infused into oil and used, a few warm drops at a time, for ordinary earache discomfort, a folk remedy that's stuck around in home medicine cabinets for generations. There's an old folk tradition proposing that mullein might be the mysterious protective herb Hermes gives Ulysses in Homer's Odyssey, the plant called moly in the text. Scholars have never settled on what moly actually was, but people have been making the mullein argument for centuries, which tells you something about how much protective power this plant has been credited with. Mullein is what's called a biennial. Its first year, it's just a low, fuzzy rosette of leaves close to the ground, easy to miss entirely. The second year, that dramatic 7-foot flowering torch shoots straight up. If you learn to spot the first-year rosette, you're a full year ahead of everyone else on this list. I dry the leaves whole, then strain the tea carefully through a cloth or coffee filter before drinking. The fine hairs on fresh mullein leaf can be irritating to the throat if they aren't filtered out properly. Ridiculous nickname. Genuinely useful plant. Both things can be true at the same time, and with mullein, they are. 7th plant, and this is purslane. If you've been yanking it out of your flower beds without a second thought, I want you to picture something before we go any further. Out here, purslane shows up in the cracks of the garden path most of the warm months. Thick little paddle-shaped leaves, almost succulent looking. My grandmother used to call it a nuisance. I've changed my mind about that one. Here's the part that surprised me. This little weed carries more of a particular fat your body can't make on its own, the same family as what's in fish oil, than almost any leafy green that's ever been tested for it. Researchers have measured it at somewhere around 300 to 400 milligrams in every 100 grams of fresh leaf. That's not a small number for a plant. Think of it like this. Your body needs a certain building block fat to keep your cell walls flexible and your heart happy, and it can't build that block from scratch. Fish give you it. So it turns out, does this stubborn little weed most people spray without a second thought? This isn't some fringe survivalist plant either. It's eaten on purpose across the Mediterranean, in Mexico, where it's called verdolagas, and across parts of Asia and the Middle East. We're the strange ones, spraying it. Henry David Thoreau wrote about this same plant in Walden back in the 1850s and mentioned making a perfectly good meal of it, boiled with a little salt. People forget how recently weed and food were the same category. Here's a detail botanists find genuinely interesting. Purslane can shift how it processes sunlight and water depending on how dry conditions get, conserving moisture in a way most garden plants simply can't manage. It's part of why it thrives in the exact cracked, neglected soil where nothing else will grow. One caution, and it's a fair one. Purslane runs higher in oxalates than most greens, so if you've ever dealt with kidney stones, that's worth a conversation with your doctor before you start eating it by the bowlful. I toss the leaves straight into a salad, or wilt them quickly into scrambled eggs the way you would spinach. Nothing complicated. It's got a slightly lemony, mild crunch to it that I've grown fond of. It's a humble little plant to carry that much nutrition. Feels like the kind of quiet, provided-for detail worked into the things nobody's paying attention to. On to the next one. 8th plant, and this one comes with a story I genuinely love telling. Burdock. Big, coarse leaves, tall stalks, and those round burrs everybody's pulled off a sock or a dog at some point. In the late 1940s, a Swiss engineer named George de Mestral came back from a walk covered in burdock burrs, his and his dog's both. Instead of just complaining about it, he put one under a microscope and found thousands of tiny hooks doing all the work. That curiosity turned into Velcro, patented roughly a decade later, a genuinely billion-dollar company, born from a weed most people just curse at. Beyond the burrs, The root itself has been used across multiple traditional systems, including Old European and East Asian herbal medicine, as what they called a blood purifier and a support for the skin. In plain language, that generally meant they used it for clearing up acne, eczema, and other stubborn skin flare-ups over time. Modern lab studies have identified specific compounds in burdock root with documented antioxidant and mild anti-inflammatory activity. That's a real, measurable property. It's simply not the same thing as a guarantee for any specific skin condition, and I want to be straightforward about that distinction. Herbalists have long placed burdock in a category they call an alterative, an old-fashioned term for something believed to support the body's ordinary channels of elimination over time, working gradually rather than immediately. It's a gentler claim than the flashy ones, and honestly, a more honest one too. In Japan, gobo is actually cultivated as a deliberate root vegetable crop, sold bundled at grocery stores the same way carrots are sold here, which is a useful reminder that one culture's stubborn weed is another culture's dinner vegetable, grown on purpose for centuries. One quick identification note, because it matters. Young burdock leaves can resemble a couple of other plants at a glance, so if you're foraging rather than growing it on purpose, cross-check with more than one source before you dig. The same rule that applies to every plant on this list. The root itself, once you dig past that tough outer skin, tastes something like a mild, earthy parsnip. I slice it thin and roast it, or simmer it into soup the way it's traditionally done in Japanese cooking, where it's called gobo. Clever. Nature usually is, if you're willing to actually look closely at what's bothering you instead of just pulling it out and mowing it down. I leave a patch of burdock at the back fence line on purpose now. Ninth plant, lamb's quarters, sometimes called fat hen or goosefoot for the shape of the leaf. If you've got a vegetable garden, this one probably shows up in it uninvited every single year. One cooked cup of this stuff carries a substantial dose of calcium, more vitamin C than an equivalent serving of orange, and enough vitamin A and vitamin K to make a nutritionist do a double take. It's a genuinely close relative of both spinach and quinoa, and it tastes like a milder, slightly nuttier version of spinach. Archaeological evidence shows indigenous peoples across North America, including the Blackfoot, were storing and eating the seeds of this plant centuries before European contact. It's not a recent discovery. People just stopped paying attention to it somewhere along the way. Like spinach, it does carry oxalates, so if that's a concern for you specifically, cooking it down reduces that considerably, and moderation is the simple rule here, same as with any dark leafy green. In India, this same plant is called bathua, and it's a genuine, intentional ingredient, not a forage curiosity cooked into sag alongside mustard greens and spinach and worked into flatbread dough. An entire cuisine treats on purpose what most American gardeners are actively trying to eliminate. The name goosefoot comes directly from the shape of the leaf, which does genuinely resemble a small webbed footprint if you look at it straight on. That white, almost powdery coating you'll notice on the young leaves is completely natural, and it actually helps the plant reflect excess sunlight. Because it's such a close botanical relative of quinoa, the seeds themselves are edible too, and were historically ground into a coarse flour by several indigenous groups long before quinoa ever became a familiar word at the grocery store. It grows so eagerly in disturbed soil that I've genuinely stopped weeding it out of the vegetable beds entirely. I just harvest it alongside whatever I actually planted, and nobody at the table has ever complained about the extra green on the plate. It's one of the easiest wild greens to identify with confidence too, which again, matters more than people think. I treat it exactly like spinach in the kitchen, sautéed with garlic, folded into eggs, or wilted into a soup right at the end of cooking. Abundant. Once it takes hold in a garden bed, it keeps coming back on its own, practically demanding to be eaten instead of composted. 10th plant, and it's a small one, chickweed. Delicate little stems, tiny white star-shaped flowers, and it carpets bare garden soil faster than almost anything else I grow on purpose. Herbalists have reached for chickweed for centuries, specifically for irritated, itchy skin, insect bites, minor rashes, that kind of everyday annoyance. Old English cottage gardens practically counted on it growing wild near the door for exactly that reason. The plant carries a mild, soothing, gel-like quality in its stems and leaves, similar in feel to what you'd get from aloe, which is likely part of why crushing it directly onto irritated skin has stayed a common home remedy across so many different cultures and generations. It's also a genuinely nutrient-dense little green, carrying meaningful amounts of vitamin C and iron for something most people step over without a second look. The specific skin-soothing compounds are still being characterized in modern research. So I'll say plainly, traditional use here runs well ahead of the clinical evidence, and that's worth knowing. The name chickweed comes honestly from its history as chicken and bird feed, since poultry keepers have tossed it to their flocks for generations. And it turns out what's good for a backyard hen is often perfectly good for the person keeping her too. Beyond the skin-soothing reputation, chickweed has its own long history as an early tonic green, eaten fresh in salads specifically for its mineral content after long stretches of eating mostly stored, preserved foods back before grocery stores made fresh greens available year-round. One identification note worth taking seriously. Chickweed has a look-alike called scarlet pimpernel that isn't safe to eat, so before you forage any of this yourself, cross-check with a reliable plant identification guide, not just a quick glance. It's one of the softest textures in the whole garden, honestly, and it doesn't seem to mind poor soil or a bit of shade, which is probably why it shows up in every neglected corner I own. Herbalists have used it as a poultice for centuries, and a mild internal tea besides, always in modest amounts rather than large quantities. I'll crush a small handful fresh and press it directly onto a bug bite, or infuse the dried herb into a simple oil for a homemade salve later on. Gentle. If any plant on this list deserves that word specifically, it's this one. Soft under a rain, soft in a poultice, easy to miss, and easy to love once you know to look for it. 11th plant, wild violet. Heart-shaped leaves, small purple flowers low to the ground, and if you've got shady patches of lawn, I'd guess you've got this growing there whether you've noticed it or not. European folk medicine reached for violet leaves and flowers specifically for coughs and sore throats for generations, syrups made by steeping the flowers in honey and sugar water being one of the more common old preparations in cottage herbal traditions. Violet leaves themselves carry a genuinely high vitamin C content, historically enough that some foraging guides list them among the richer wild sources available, right alongside citrus in terms of raw concentration by weight. The flowers themselves are entirely edible and genuinely pretty tossed into a salad or frozen into ice cubes for something a little unexpected at the table. The leaves I'll add to a simple soup for body, same as you might with sorrel. The French city of Toulouse has built an entire local tradition around candying violet flowers and sugar, a confection that's been made there for well over a century. It's a good reminder that this same little lawn flower has been treated as something genuinely worth cultivating on purpose elsewhere in the world. There are a few different violet species that get lumped together under this same common name, and the sweet-scented European violet, Viola odorata, is the one most closely tied to the old cough syrup tradition. The wild American violet growing in your lawn right now is a close cousin, Viola sororia, and it's used in largely the same ways. Older folk traditions also reached for violet preparations for headaches and for helping settle a restless mind before sleep, though I'll be honest, that particular use has considerably less modern research behind it than some of the other plants on this list. The heart-shaped leaves themselves are edible too, cooked down the same way you'd treat a mild spinach, though they carry a slightly mucilaginous quality, similar in a smaller way to what we'll see shortly with mallow. I've got a whole shaded corner of the yard that's gone almost entirely to violet on its own, and I've simply stopped fighting it. Some patches of the garden, I've learned, do better when I just leave them alone. I want to say it was my mother who first showed me you could eat the flowers, not just look at them. Or maybe it was a neighbor. That detail's gotten fuzzy over the years, but the lesson held. Delicate. Free. Growing in the shade nobody else bothers to look at. 12th plant, yellow dock. Tall, with big wavy-edged leaves and a deep, almost carrot-colored root once you dig down far enough to find it. This root has one of the longest folk reputations of anything on this list specifically for supporting healthy iron levels and what old herbalists called blood building, a tradition that stretches across European and early American folk medicine alike. Here's where I want to be careful and honest with you, because this one matters. The root does carry documented iron content, but it's the plant-based, non-heme kind, which your body absorbs considerably less efficiently than the iron in, say, red meat, and yellow dock also carries meaningful oxalates. If you suspect you're actually iron deficient, that's not something to self-treat with a root tea. That deserves an actual blood test and a conversation with your doctor first. Full stop. Yellow dock, at most, is a traditional supportive addition, not a replacement for diagnosis or treatment. Yellow dock belongs to the same genus as garden sorrel, rumex, which is why the young leaves carry a similar tart, lemony edge before they get too big and bitter to enjoy raw. There's also a very similar-looking relative, curly dock, that gets used in much the same way and is easy to confuse with this one. Beyond the iron reputation, yellow dock root has traditionally been used as a gentle support for sluggish digestion and for skin conditions like eczema, generally taken as part of what old herbalists called a tonic regimen, meant to ease the body through a period of dietary change. That taproot goes down remarkably deep, sometimes a couple of feet or more, which is exactly why gardeners curse this plant so thoroughly. Half measures never work. You either get the whole root, or it's back within a season, growing right back from whatever you left behind. The young leaves, before that reddish seed stalk shoots up, can be cooked down like a slightly tart green, similar to how you'd treat sorrel, though most people around here know this plant only by its stubborn root and never think to try the leaves at all. When I do use it, I'll simmer the chopped root down low and slow into a strong decoction, the same way you'd make a bone broth, and use it as an occasional addition, not a daily habit. Overlooked, yellow dock gets pulled and cursed at more than almost anything else on this list, mostly because that root system is such a stubborn thing to dig out completely. 13th plant, and we're closing in now, common mallow. Round, scalloped leaves, and if you've ever found little disc-shaped seed pods that look almost like tiny wheels of cheese, that's this plant. Mallow was eaten as an actual vegetable by both the ancient Greeks and Romans, written about by Roman writers as food for the poor during lean years, precisely because it grows so reliably where almost nothing else will. The whole plant is genuinely mucilaginous, meaning it releases a natural soothing gel when it's cooked or steeped, similar in feel to okra. That same soothing quality is why mallow leaf tea has traditionally been used for scratchy throats and irritated stomachs across centuries of European folk practice. Quick clarification, because people mix this up constantly. This common mallow is a cousin of the plant that originally gave us the word marshmallow, Althea officinalis, but it's a different species entirely. The soothing, mucilaginous quality runs in the whole family, common mallow included, just usually in a slightly milder form. Roman writers, including Horace, mention mallow directly in their own works, describing simple meals built around it, which tells you this wasn't some obscure hedgeweed to them. It was ordinary, everyday food, eaten the way we'd eat a side salad today. Those little round seed pods earned the nickname cheese plant in parts of the country, specifically because kids have been snacking on them straight off the stem for generations, long before anyone thought to write a foraging guide about it. I let a patch of mallow grow wild right along the garden shed, mostly because the bees seem to appreciate the flowers just as much as I appreciate the leaves. Harvest it young, before the leaves toughen up too much in the heat, and it stays tender and mild. It's remarkably drought-tolerant, too, one of the last green things standing in my yard during a genuinely dry stretch, which says something about how little this plant actually needs from us to keep producing. I'll chop the young leaves into soup near the end of cooking, where that natural thickening quality works almost like a gentle, homemade cornstarch. The little green seed pods are edible, too, straight off the plant, with a mild, slightly nutty flavor. Provided for. That's the phrase that comes to mind with mallow, a plant poor families leaned on for centuries during hard years, still growing free along every fence line today for anyone willing to bend down and look. 14th and last one, red clover. Those familiar pink-purple round flower heads most people know from childhood, pulling the petals out one at a time for the little drop of nectar at the base. Red clover carries a group of plant compounds called isoflavones, shaped similarly enough to a hormone your body already makes that they can gently interact with the same receptors, sort of like a spare key that fits the lock loosely, without turning it with quite the same force as the original. Multiple research reviews have looked specifically at red clover isoflavones for menopausal hot flashes, and the honest picture is a mixed one. Several meta-analyses report a modest, statistically real reduction in how often hot flashes occur. Other reviews of that same body of research describe the evidence as inconclusive. Both of those things are true at once, and I think you deserve that full picture rather than just the flattering half of it. Because of that hormone-like activity, red clover is absolutely a conversation to have with your doctor first, especially if you have any personal or family history of hormone-sensitive conditions. This isn't one to just start taking quietly on your own. When I do use it, it's as a simple dried flower tea, and I treat it the way I'd treat any supplement with real hormonal activity, occasionally, and with my eyes open, not as a daily habit I stop thinking about. Beyond anything medicinal, red clover does real, measurable work in the soil itself. Like most legumes, it partners with bacteria in its roots to pull nitrogen straight out of the air and deposit it back into the ground, which is why farmers have planted it as a cover crop for generations, completely apart from any health use. Red clover shows up in the traditional medicine of the Cherokee and in various European folk systems too, historically used for coughs and skin conditions well before anyone had isolated a single isoflavone in a laboratory. It's also, hands down, one of the best plants in my entire yard for honeybees, and I'll be honest, that alone would be reason enough for me to let a patch of it grow along the back fence, medicine aside. 3-part leaves, the rare 4-leafed one everybody hunts for as a child. It's a plant most of us met long before we ever thought to ask what it might actually be good for. Persistent. 14 plants, growing free, mostly ignored, and every single one of them with a real, documented reason people kept coming back to them for generations. That's not an accident, to my mind. That's provision. Now that's 14 plants most people spend their weekends trying to get rid of. I hope you'll look at your own yard a little differently the next time you're out there with a bag and a pair of gloves. Some of what's growing there has been tended by human hands, in one form or another, for longer than most countries have existed. Before you go pulling any of these up on purpose or start using them regularly, talk to your own doctor, especially if you're pregnant, nursing, on any regular medication, or managing a chronic condition. Everything here comes from research and tradition, not a prescription pad, and it was never meant to replace one. Here's my question for you, out at the garden fence. Which one of these 14 is already growing somewhere on your own property right now? And which one are you actually going to try first? I'm genuinely curious. Tell me down in the comments. I read every single one, and I usually reply to as many as I can. If this kind of thing interests you, come join us here at Clara's Roots and Remedies. New plants, new research, honest science, and a lot more of my own garden mistakes. Every single week, there's always something new growing out here. Whatever's growing at the edge of your own garden, dearie, I hope you'll take a second closer look at it before you pull it. There is genuinely more provided for us out there than most of us ever stop to notice. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next one.